Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules, and at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome to another edition of POA The Revival. Should be a very enlightening edition of the program this week. Our guest is Tyler Greenfield. I'm not sure how we crossed paths over on Twitter, but he's posted some really interesting research that he's done. He's sort of in the cryptozoological sphere. I think Truth is Scarier and Kevin Gould kind of crossed paths with him a lot. So that's how I came upon his work. And he's a paleontologist, science writer. He studies sharks, dinosaurs, cephalopods, paleoart, taxonomy, and cryptozoology. So it's we're going to get into the sciences a little bit here this week on BOA. And I'm going to do my best to keep up because he's a legitimate scientist, folks. He's a legitimate scientist. He's not, I don't want to throw shade on any of our other guests, but he's going to school for science, real science. So we're going to get into all that. And like I said, I think it'll be an enlightening conversation. Hopefully I can keep up. He's got a blog, and this is where it already starts to go off the rails. It's Inserte Sedis.
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. And you can find that. I'm going to spell it out for folks. INCERTAESEDIS, blog.wordpress.com, or just punch in Tyler Greenfield, paleontology or sharks or something like that. And I'm sure his info will come up. So with all that said, welcome to the program, Tyler. Really looking forward to talking to you.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
So with the first-time guests, we started out the bio, the background. Who is Tyler Greenfield, and how did you, get mixed up in all this stuff?
Well, it really goes back to when I was a little kid. I would have been growing up like in the early 2000s. I'm pretty young. So, and at that time, there were a lot of cryptozoology-related TV shows, right? Like Monster Quest, Lost Tapes, and especially Finding Bigfoot was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
That really got me interested in cryptozoology, but I didn't start studying it as a scholarly sort of official study until about 6 years ago. I just decided to start doing some serious research into various cryptozoological topics, and I've been doing that ever since. And right now, I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Wyoming. I'm getting a master's degree in geology, but my focus is specifically on paleontology. My master's thesis will actually be about Megalodon, the giant extinct shark.
Yeah, that's kind of one of your big topics in a way. So you're studying paleontology. This is the study of dinosaurs and everything, right?
Yes, dinosaurs, but really any prehistoric animal in general, up until about 10,000 or so years ago. And then we start to consider things like zoo archaeology and archaeology and history. But anything older than about 10,000 years starts to become paleontology.
Okay, so maybe you can answer this question. I don't want to throw a curveball at you, but I think this came up with another guest in the past, and they were like, I don't know. I think you'd have to ask a paleontologist that. So here we are. But it's hard to imagine, because I'm pretty young too, but I'm not as young as you, but we're children of the same later era, right? So it's like, dinosaurs are everywhere. It's hard to sort of fathom that there was a world before they knew of dinosaurs. Like, how did that even happen? How did they, because you hear about the Civil War and shit, and it's like, I don't even know when this all happened. I think after that, but I don't know. But at some point, someone dug something up and they were like, what is this thing? And then dinosaurs started. So how did that all happen?
Yeah, so it really started in the late 1600s, early 1700s. Some of the first dinosaur bones and teeth were found in England. They were not initially recognized as what we would today know as dinosaurs.
Right.
There were leg bones from a dinosaur that we today call Megalosaurus. but they were originally identified as being like the thigh bones of giant humans or possibly even elephants or mammoths. And then there were teeth of various types of dinosaurs that were found, and they were usually identified as being fish or some kind of other, maybe a reptile, like a small lizard tooth, but not like a huge dinosaur. So it wouldn't be until 1842 that a paleontologist named Richard Owen coined the word dinosaur to refer to them as a group. And ever since then, we've just called them dinosaurs. But we had known of them before the word actually existed.
Okay. All right. And they started like fine until they could kind of like start to put these together. And then they were like, okay, these are not mammoths or whatever.
Once we had more complete material, more complete skulls and skeletons, it started to become clear that they were their own type of animal, not like anything seen before and not like anything alive today.
That must have been crazy at the time.
Oh, yeah, it would have been mind-blowing to them. Yeah, they caused a lot of excitement. Soon after Richard Owen coined the word dinosaur, in the 1850s in England, at the Crystal Palace Park, they built these huge models of dinosaurs, including the Megalosaurus, but also a big plant eater called the Iguanodon and some various other prehistoric animals. And they still exist today. You can still go see them on display, but they built these huge models that were supposed to be life size. So, they're like 20, 30 feet long, and they attracted a lot of popular attention. People went to visit them by the millions. They were reproduced as drawings in newspapers and magazines all over. So they caused a huge excitement when they were first recognized as their own group of animals. Yeah, they still do today, but it would have been even more mind-blowing to the Victorian audience to find out that these were something that existed in the past.
Yeah. Without even getting too deep into it, but I'm sure it had some like religious implications too. We were like,
yes.
Yeah.
Some people really struggled with it religiously, and other people saw it as like really no big deal. They saw dinosaurs and extinction and all these prehistoric animals as being perfectly in line with the Bible. Yeah. Whether that be like a literal reading of the Bible or a metaphorical reading. But you see a lot of religious wording in a lot of early writings about dinosaurs and other prehistoric reptiles.
Now, was there any consideration that these were like dragons of old? Did that ever kind of come up?
Yes, it did. They were often referred to as dragons in poetry and fiction and more verbose scientific writings. Yeah. Sometimes they meant that in just a metaphorical sense, like they're like dragons. But some people truly believe they were the dragons of mythology. There's a great illustration by a paleoartist who was active sort of in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, named Waterhouse Hawkins. And he actually drew St. George fighting the dragon, but instead of the dragon, it was a pterodactyl. Now, he did not believe them to literally be dragons, but he thought it would be a cool idea for an illustration to have St. George fighting a pterodactyl as a dragon.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And like I was saying, growing up, I've seen people kind of grumble about this, but it is interesting how like the depictions of the dinosaurs have even now kind of evolved as we've learned more about them. Where some of the drawings and stuff when I was younger don't look anything like the dinosaurs now.
Oh, yeah. We continue to update our reconstructions every year. Feathers are one of the biggest changes that has happened to dinosaurs. Yeah. That didn't really start to happen until like the late 1990s. We actually got confirmation of non-bird dinosaurs that had feathers at that time. So then it started to become more popular in paleoart. But people had been speculating that non-avian dinosaurs had feathers since at least the 1970s. You can find a few depictions that are that old that actually have like these meat-eating dinosaurs with feathers, like a sparse covering on them. So the idea has been around for a long time. It just didn't become very popular until about like 20, 30 years ago. But then, of course, we make other updates to their anatomy. Once we get more skeletal material, some dinosaurs are initially only known from bits and pieces. And then we'll get a more complete skeleton and it'll completely change what we know about that dinosaur. Like there's an example, there's one dinosaur called Dinochirus. It was initially known from these huge arms, but that was all we had of it. So there were a lot of different reconstructions showing what the rest of the body might look like. Nobody could really agree on it. And then I think around 2014, they actually found and described a new, pretty much complete skeleton. And it's even weirder than you would imagine from these big arms. It has sort of like this long head with a duckbill at the end. Then it's got a big, like, raised hump on its back.
Oh, wow.
And sort of like a short, stumpy tail, but pretty long legs and arms. So it's a totally bizarre dinosaur, even wilder than what we would have guessed that it looked like just from its arms. So there's that kind of thing too, where we just get more material and we're able to build a better picture.
So the whole thing about how the birds came from the dinosaurs, that didn't really kind of come into fashion until like, the last couple generations?
Yeah, that's a more recent idea in terms of gaining mainstream acceptance. Wouldn't really be until like the late 1960s and into the 70s and 80s that the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs became accepted by the paleontological community. However, there were speculations on it even a century before that. Some early paleontologists like Edward Drinker Cope and Thomas Huxley had noticed similarities, especially like in the foot structure of dinosaurs, and comparing them to birds. Like if you look at like an emu or a cassowary today, and their big, three-toed clawed feet, they look just like a dinosaur. Early paleontologists noticed those similarities and said, hey, maybe birds could have come from dinosaurs. But then that kind of got pushed to the side. In the 1920s, especially, there was a mainstream movement towards recognizing the ancestors of birds as being more closely related to like crocodiles and other reptiles instead of dinosaurs. And that was the mainstream view for a very long time. And that didn't get overturned until the 1960s and 70s. So the idea had existed for quite a while. It just was not accepted until, 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's really, it's just crazy how much things have changed. Like, I guess I'm sure it was probably more populous than I remember as a kid. But like when I was a kid, it was kind of like when I was growing up, there was like 9 planets in the solar system. That was really it. They never even like talked about. They were like, oh, there might be other ones elsewhere. Who knows? And now there's like millions of planets, right? And it's kind of a little bit like that with the dinosaurs, because like when I was growing up, there was sort of like your 5 or 6 main ones, but now it seems like there got to be like thousands of them at this point.
Oh yeah. There's well over 1,000 named genera and species of dinosaurs today. There's not been any recent lists that I know of, but I know of some older lists, even from like 20, 30 years ago that had already had 1,000 different types of dinosaurs compiled together. So, and we usually describe between like 25 and 50 new species every year. So there's about one between every 1 to 2 weeks. There's a new species described.
Now, as well, Wyoming. Now that's like big time fossil country, right?
Oh,
Is that why you're up there in Wyoming?
Yes, exactly. We have so many fossils here, and not just dinosaurs. We get all sorts of animals, even sharks and fishes and other marine animals. I mean, we're 3,000 plus miles away from the oceans today. But yeah, up here in the mountains in Wyoming, we do have marine fossils. There were multiple inland seaways that actually flooded this area in the past.
Have you gone out like on expeditions? So you're just studying geology and paleontology, I presume. Do you go on any of these things where like they excavate and everything?
Yep. Yeah, I'm working on a new site right now that actually has fossils from what was called the Western Interior Seaway. It existed roughly between like 165 million years ago, but it came and went in different phases. And we find all sorts of fish fossils at the site. Some are just like isolated pieces of bone and scales, but we have been finding some more complete skeletons. So it's my job to actually identify those fishes, and I'll be writing up a paper about that eventually, although that'll be for my doctoral work. So that's still down the line a ways. But so I do go out in the field. I do field work, but I also do plenty of reading and lab work and library work too. I stay busy all the time. It's constant research, no matter if it's field or here at home.
Yeah, no, I can tell. We had to squeeze Tyler in to do this show like on a Saturday afternoon because he's so busy with everything he has going on.
Yeah, so also teaching assistant. So I teach labs and grade papers, and I go to our lab meetings, and I have to help out with other people's papers. Give feedback, consult on things. I've also been a consultant on documentaries
Oh, I know. I have it in the notes.
Yeah, I was a consultant on the last Walking with Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Of course, I do podcast interviews. And
There you go. So when you're out, you're out there, and this is like, what kind of like is it arid? Is it like super dry, sort of deserty terrain you're like digging in and stuff?
I would call it scrubland. This fish site I'm talking about is actually near to Laramie, the town where I'm at. It's only about 6 miles away, so it's not too remote. Yeah, I would call it scrubland. It's pretty dry, but there's still grasses and bushes. Not very many trees, though.
And so, what do you do?
Entirely a desert.
You're like digging in the ground. So then, how do you know when you? How do you dig and not mess up the fossils, dude? And then what happens when you find one? Take me through this a little bit, if you don't mind.
So this site was actually discovered by somebody who owns a ranch.
Okay.
They were digging for something. I can't remember if it was like a well or a septic tank or some kind of excavation. They were digging into the ground, and then they hit this layer that had the fossil fishes in them. They started cracking open these rocks, and there were just, pieces of fish and then sometimes entire skeletons inside. So a lot of times we rely on other people to actually make the discoveries. A lot of times they're by accident. Right, you don't really just go out and dig a hole in the ground in a random spot and try to find something. You go out when somebody has already found something.
And then you go and like carefully try to start removing these things from the layer of ground, essentially.
Yeah, you just have to very carefully. I mean, you still have to hit them with like a rock hammer to get pieces of rock off, but you can do it carefully enough so that you don't damage the fossils. And then you'll take the chunk of rock back to the lab, and that's where you can prepare it more carefully. We have all sorts of like pneumatic tools, drills, picks, even like little tiny needles and pin vices that you can just carefully scratch the soft rock away piece by piece around the bone. That's where the detail work comes in, is when you get back to the lab. They say for every hour you work in the field, it's like 6 to 10 hours worth of work in the lab. So,
wow. And so you're working in the lab too, is in the wall and stuff you're doing. So, all right. So you're like working with this little laser thing or whatever it is wow.
Yeah. And then I've got to process sediment samples, because we also look for microfossils too, which can't usually be seen with the naked eye. They're, tiny remains of organisms, little shells. I mean, just tiny, and I have to pick them out with a pin under.
Oh God! Oh my God!
And those can tell us about like the water conditions at the time, the temperature, the depth. They can also be used to date the site. These kinds of microorganisms, they're called forams. They're like little amoebas that build tiny little shells to live in, and they have rapid species turnover. So about every 100,000 years or so, there's a new species, which is really quick for animals. Other animal species will last like millions of years. So if you have a certain species or a certain like combination of species, you can tell like within 100,000 to 1,000,000 years of where you're at in time.
Wow!
You also have to process sediment samples for all these little fossils to look at them. Then I also have to take pictures using the high-powered microscope and our good cameras of not just the microfossils, but also the fish, to get some of the fine details on the bones and some of the fish scales, because the ornamentation on the scales can be used to identify them. So a lot of fine detail work.
Wow, I'm really blown away. That's really cool.
That's the stuff you don't see in the movies. And you just see them digging in the ground, and there's like this perfect skeleton. Then it's in the museum and it's done. You don't see everything in between, which is where comes in.
That's wild. Yeah, that's really cool. Before we get into Megalodon, so why do you think dinosaurs? This is sort of like a amusing question, a speculative question, but why do you think there's such a almost an innate sort of obsession in a sense with dinosaurs? Like, why is there that? Like, kids love dinosaurs. Like, there's something in the human condition that connects to these things more than just in a unique way, it seems. Wait, what? You know what I mean? And why do you think that is?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think humans have always had a fascination with large animals and reptiles in particular. I mean, if you look at legends of dragons, giant serpents, I mean, they're in every mythology. People have always been interested in them. And I think on a subconscious level, we see them as dinosaurs as an extension of like the giant reptile tradition that is ingrained in humanity. Even if most people don't think about it that way, they see dinosaurs and say, "Oh, cool." There's like some part deep at the back of your brain that recognizes like the giant reptile motif in dinosaurs. I think that's why there is such a large fascination with them among people who usually have entirely different interests and social cultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
Universal phenomenon.
Yeah, it really is. I wonder if there's any element of it to like that we're like that we share the planet, not literally, right? Not like that, but they have the planet first, then we have the planet, but it's like a sort of like a cautionary tale, or like there, but for the grace of God go we kind of thing, where it's like we have it first, and look what happened to them. Like it kind of like it's a sort of an interesting cultural sort of reminder that it's like, well, nothing lasts forever.
I mean, there's that phrase. It's in Jurassic Park. When dinosaurs ruled the Earth, we think of them as being rulers of the Earth in the same way humanity is. So we're almost their successors in a kind of way.
Yeah.
But of course, they go extinct. So there is that cautionary tale aspect too. Although their extinction was entirely unavoidable, basically like the worst set of circumstances possible. I mean, a freak meteorite happens to hit the Earth, and it hits in one of the worst places possible. It hits on like sort of a shallow sea where there's lots of buried organic material. Then that gets thrown up into the atmosphere and blocks out the sun. So it's not quite the same situation as we're in, or we're contributing to our own downfall. But there's still that connection there. And I also think we also have a fascination with things that we can only see indirect evidence of, but can never directly observe. We just occasionally we'll get some soft tissues like skin and feathers, but we can never see a live non-bird dinosaur ever.
Right.
Even or like genetically modified bird that looks like a dinosaur, which some people have been trying to make, would never be like an actual dinosaur.
Yeah.
So there's that tantalizing aspect to them. We can never quite reach them. We just get a little glimpse of them.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Dinosaurs. Obviously we said you had an interest in cryptozoology, and sort of the release cross big time is the Mokele-mbembe. Do you have thoughts on this creature?
The Mokele-mbembe is a difficult creature to discuss because it's been confused and conflated with so many other like African mystery animals.
Okay.
I mean, you see like unknown elephants, unknown rhinos, giant monitor lizards, giant turtles, supposed living dinosaurs, which is like the classic traditional conception, but not even one type of dinosaur. Sometimes it's a sauropod. Sometimes it's actually like a ceratopsian, a horned dinosaur. There's all sorts of different identities that have been proposed for the Mokele-mbembe. But there's also a lot of related like names and creatures that get mixed up with it. Like I think the Megalodon, or however you pronounce it, is another one that it often gets like flip-flopped with the Mokele-mbembe. And of course, it's hard to say what the traditional folklore actually is about these animals, because so many people have gone in and like tried to interview them, but have interviewed them in sort of a leading the witness type way, where they've been purposefully like trying to get them to identify these creatures as dinosaurs or some kind of extinct animal. And now there's an incentive for them to make up stories to sell to these kind of people. So it's hard to say if
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Traditional folklore has survived intact, or if the modern version we're getting is totally distorted because of these perverse incentives. Because cryptozoologists and some creationists and just explorers in general have gone in and tried to get them to identify the Mokele-mbembe and other mystery animals as dinosaurs. So now they have an incentive to identify them as dinosaurs, even though they may not necessarily have in the past.
Right.
So unfortunately, I can't really offer you like a definitive statement or opinion.
No, what you said was even better, actually.
I think what Mokele-mbembe is, and you should be suspicious if anybody says they can, because nobody really knows what's going on with the Mokele-mbembe and its related cousins and relatives.
Yeah, no, your answer is great.
It needs study,
Yeah.
but I'm generally busy working on other stuff cryptozoologically, especially with sharks and fishes and other marine monsters.
Yeah.
So I haven't ever really had the time to delve into that very much, but it's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why I kind of set it up in a way because all I know is dinosaur in the Congo. That's like the extent. And it's like, you're right. It's like, it is so much more.
Yeah, that's the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah.
It's actually a bunch of different things. And nobody's sure exactly what it is. If it's entirely folkloric or if it's based on some kind of known animal or if it's based on a new unknown animal.
Yeah.
Lots of different opinions.
So Megalodon, this is your white whale, right?
Yes.
So talk about this. So what drew you to this and sort of give us, let's start with, we'll get all in it, man. So we'll start with what is the Megalodon? I think I know, but people, we got to catch them up. And then how did you get in, what drew you to the Megalodon? How did the rivalry start?
Sure. So Megalodon is probably the largest shark that ever existed. It's certainly the largest predatory shark, although its size is somewhat debated. Estimates of its maximum size have ranged anywhere from like 50 to 120 feet. Now, it almost certainly was not 120 feet long. That's too large.
Yeah.
But more realistic is somewhere between like 60 and 65 feet. So it's definitely the largest predatory, eating large prey in that sense, shark. Whale sharks might get to be around the same size. Their maximum length is also debated, but they might get to be in the 60 to 65 foot range too. But they, of course, eat plankton. They're not macro predators.
Yeah.
So it could be the largest shark that ever lived. It first appears in the fossil record around like 20 to 23 million years ago, and then goes extinct sometime between 3.6 and 2.6 million years ago. It's been extinct for quite a while, but it's still relatively recent in terms of the grand scale of geologic history. So we know about it mainly from its teeth. It has these huge triangular teeth that can be up to like 6 or 7 inches long. And those we find quite literally by the trillions. I mean, if you had, you could not count every single meg tooth that has ever been found. Pretty much every museum in the world has at least one. Yeah, they're extremely abundant. But this makes sense because sharks constantly cycle through their teeth. They lose on average of about one every day.
Holy shit!
And megalodons may have lived for quite a long time given their large size. Some estimates of their maximum age have put them as living between like 88 and 100 years.
Oh, wow.
So if you can imagine losing a tooth for every day for 88 to 100 years, that's a lot of teeth. I did the calculations on that. I want to say somewhere between like 35 and 40,000 teeth for a single megalodon in a lifetime.
Wow.
And if you imagine there have to be populations in the millions at any given time, that's a lot of teeth.
Yeah.
They live for 15 plus million years. So it's just megalodon after megalodon.
Right.
Tooth after tooth. So they're extremely abundant. We find them on coasts around the world, but we also find them in the deep ocean basins. They've actually been recovered by trawlers and even been found by submersibles. I mean, 10,000, 12,000 feet deep on the bottom of the ocean. So we find them everywhere. But we do actually have some skeletal material from megalodon. It's a common misconception that you'll see a lot, even from some shark scientists who should really know better, is that we don't have any megalodon skeletons because cartilage doesn't fossilize. But the problem is that cartilage actually does fossilize. Like the vertebrae, and we've actually found some cartilages from the end of the nose that possibly belong to megalodon. And then some fragments of the jaws. And we also have more complete skeletons of some of its earlier relatives.
Yeah.
So we do actually know quite a bit about the skeleton of megalodon, despite the popular misconception. So it's proven to be a popular animal for quite a while. I mean, we've known about it for at least 20 or 30,000 years. I know, that sounds like a crazy long time. But we've actually found artifacts from the Ice Age in Central Europe. Megalodon teeth that actually have wear marks on them, indicating that they were probably modified for use as tools. So finding them for at least that long.
Wow.
Even the ancient Mayans, we found megalodon teeth in sacrificial altars.
Wow.
Fossilized shark teeth that were offered up to the gods as a sacrifice.
That's
And
remarkable.
we even think that one of the Mayan gods may be a representation of a megalodon tooth. I don't think this god actually has a name. I don't think they've actually figured out what its name is, but there are depictions of it, and it has this big, it's sort of like shark or fish shaped, and it has this single big triangular tooth that kind of looks like a megalodon tooth. So that may have been incorporated into their mythology, as well as probably other sharks living in extinct too.
Yeah.
So we as humans have known about it for a long time, but it wasn't first scientifically described until 1835. That's when it was actually named. Well, originally it was named Carcharias megalodon. Today we usually call it Otodus megalodon. There's been a lot of shifting in what genus the species should actually belong to. That's a really complicated issue that we could spend way too much time talking about. So
yes, you're very into the taxonomy, which we will not be getting much into that because I'm just like, wow, this is complicated stuff.
Confusing and complicated. Even unfortunately, even a lot of scientists don't fully understand how it works. But
yeah, it's crazy. So I can see why you'd be interested in the megalodon. So you sort of tackle the idea of like, because megalodon has become a cryptid through no fault of its own, where people are like, oh yeah, it's still swimming around out there, and you're kind of like, no, that's not the case, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would argue that it's not truly a cryptid because the sightings that have been connected with it like can't actually be confidently tied to it. But it has become a cryptid in popular culture, definitely. I mean, I've even had friends and relatives ask me about it. It's like, no, it's definitely extinct. And they're like, well, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I wrote the whole paper on it. I have the dubious distinction of probably being the expert in living megalodon, even though it's a thing that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
But I've written the most about the history of the idea. Yeah, I published a whole paper on it in 2023, but I'd been working on that for over 4 years. That was one of the first like serious cryptozoological projects I started on back in like 2019, around the same time I started my blog too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it took 4 years to actually finish writing the whole thing and publish it. But I'm already working on an update to it. There will be a shorter part 2 that I've got to actually get done because I found some more sightings and more references to discuss. So, yeah.
So what's it? So give us sort of a little thumbnail of the paper then. So you break down like these instances where people purportedly saw this and you explain why that's not the case.
Yes, exactly. I break down sort of the core classic sightings that have gotten grouped together.
Yeah.
You know how like with Bigfoot, there's like the Patterson-Gimlin film,
right?
The original footprints found in like 1958. Some of like the historical encounters, like Ape Canyon and stuff. There's like a core group of evidence that like every believer will know about.
Right.
With Megalodon, although definitely of less quality than some of the Bigfoot stuff. Not as interesting or exciting, but there are certain sightings that usually get repeated, and I discuss those. I actually break them down in detail. I actually went back and read the primary sources. If you've read any of the like cryptozoology books that talk about Megalodon, it's pretty clear that most of them have not actually read the original sightings. They often leave out details or get the dates and names of the people wrong. But I'm super detail oriented. That stuff has always got to be right for me. Yeah. And I think it should be for any serious scholar. So I always have to go back and look at the original source. So that involves scouring the internet, trying to see if there's any digital copies of anything. And if there's not, then I have to actually go to the university library and request a loan. So I've gotten a lot of physical books that way too. So I did all that research, went back to the sightings, then I sort of summarized them in my paper. And then I get into the breaking down aspect, looking at the details, seeing if they make sense with each other first. Is there anything that contradicts each other? Then looking at more like the contextual information. Was this witness reliable? Did they have a history of hoaxing? That kind of thing. And then I also look at the scientific aspects. Do these match known sharks? Could it be a misidentification of a species like a great white or a whale shark? Or does it have characteristics that like don't match any animal at all? So I break them down in detail. I also did sort of a rudimentary like scoring system where I awarded a score to each sighting based on how closely they matched Megalodon or a known species. Yeah. Spoiler, none of them actually did very well compared to Megalodon. Megalodon was usually like the worst candidate. And then other like known modern sharks usually scored better. But even then, a lot of them had details that could not reasonably be explained by a misidentification and were probably indicative of hoaxing. Like what the most famous Megalodon sighting is alleged to have occurred in 1918. So these sightings go back quite a ways. This is the earliest sighting like explicitly attributed to Megalodon.
Yeah, okay.
Like when it was first published, the people talking about it are like, oh, this was probably a Megalodon. So this happened off the coast of New South Wales in southern Australia. A group of rock lobster fishermen were fishing around their usual fishing grounds. There's an island out there called Broughton Island. So they were fishing around this island, and supposedly a giant albino shark, somewhere between 115 and 300 feet long, ate their lobster traps, tore all the lines off, and even took a bite out of one of their boats. So then they had to come back to port with these damaged boats and their missing equipment. And then they told this story to the fisheries inspector. So that's how this story got started. It was originally reported in a newspaper, and then the fisheries workers, one of them was named David Stead, and he later republished that account in one of his books, and that's where it became well known from. Most people are usually quoting from his book. I actually went back and found the original newspaper account because the newspaper account has some interesting details that David Stead's book does not have. So this newspaper account does mention that there was a severe storm, like a monsoonal storm with the gale force winds and severe flooding in the area on the same day. In fact, that's initially why the fisheries inspectors were out there. They were trying to survey if there had been any damage because of that storm.
Yeah.
So my hypothesis with that sighting is that the storm actually caused the damage and the shark was just a story made up to cover for them. Because these fishermen were actually not Australians. They were poor Greek immigrants.
Yeah.
They spoke very little English. They wouldn't have owned any of their own equipment. It would have been leased from a company. So obviously they would have been liable for damages, whether they had been operating out in the storm when they were not supposed to be, or if they had stored stuff improperly on the docks. Because again, there was flooding. It had actually come up into town on shore. So it could have washed stuff off the docks or in the houses. Anything like that could have actually damaged their boats and caused the loss of their lobster traps. So I think they had to come up with some kind of explanation where they would not have been liable for the damages. So it's a rare case of what I would call a hoax of desperation. They just had to come up with something, and then other people have taken it too seriously and not really looked into the background behind it. But there are other explanations for this. Some of the other sightings too. Some of them, at least one, I think is actually an honest misidentification. This was made by a guy named Zane Grey. He was a famous Western novelist, like in the early 1900s up through the 1930s. But he was also an avid sports fisherman and wrote several books about deep sea fishing in the South Pacific. So in one of his books, he mentions having a sighting, I think in 1928, off the coast of Rangiroa, which is a tiny island, an atoll in the South Pacific, and that he saw this big, like square-headed shark with I think he mentioned seeing some spots on its back, and that while they were fishing for yellowfin tuna, and they were reeling the fish in, and as they were bringing the fish up, this big shark's head sort of emerged, following the fish up, but then it didn't attack the fish. And then it swam under their boat and dove back down. So I think this was probably a whale shark. Again, they're large. They have a big square head, and they have a spotted back. Yeah. They also would not eat fish. See, most sharks are predators, and if you have a fish on a line, they will take the fish from the line from you. Yeah. A whale shark would not have any interest in that. So the behavior, along with the appearance, are perfectly consistent with it being a whale shark. Now, Zane Grey had actually seen whale sharks before, so then there's the question of why would he misidentify it? Well, he may have heard stories floating around the South Pacific that there was a giant, monstrous, square-headed, man-eating shark. These stories had actually existed in that area prior to that, maybe based on the whale shark, but sort of misinterpreted it as being a carnivore. So I think he may have heard some of this folklore, and that influenced his identification. He said, this kind of looks like a whale shark, but it must be this man-eating monster that I've heard so much about in this area. So I think even then there's an explanation why he might have misidentified that, and I cover all that with citations in my paper. So, and then there are various other ones that are hoaxes. Some I was able to confirm were hoaxes because they were actually plagiarized from earlier sightings. Just
Oh, wow.
the details changed. So some I was able to definitively rule out. But so I have various explanations. I break them down in as much detail as you can. These aren't the highest quality sightings. They're often pretty low on detail.
Yeah.
Not really comparable to like the more famous cryptids, but I did my best.
Well, it's tough out on the water like that. It's a different environment. It's well, what do you think of the idea? People kind of say, that so much of the world is ocean and that it's unexplored. Not necessarily maybe the megalodon, but like the possibility of other giant type creatures that might exist in the ocean that we don't know about at all yet.
And I think that's correct to some extent. I don't think we're going to find any sea serpents or like really anything crazy, but there definitely are probably new species of whales to be discovered. Like the beaked whales are a group of deep diving, like offshore whales. They're rarely seen around the coasts. They're occasionally seen at the surface by like whale watching expeditions further out to sea. But they're what we would call elusive species. We don't find them very often. A lot of the species were initially known from washed up carcasses and bones. So
yeah.
we don't see them alive very often. We have actually observed and filmed individuals that we think are new species of beaked whales. They just haven't gotten a physical specimen to confidently identify them yet. So I'm pretty confident that there are species of whales. I mean, beaked whales would be the best group, but there may be other types of whales that are still yet to be discovered. There are also some probably pretty large bony fishes to be discovered. So not sharks and rays, but basically all other fishes are bony fishes. There was a kind of fish, I think it's called the Yokozuna slickhead, that was discovered off the coast of Japan. And it's like 6 feet long. It's huge.
Oh, wow.
And it was only named like a couple of years ago. So I think there are also pretty large species of those kinds of fishes to be discovered too. But again, not like Megalodon, not like the classic like sea serpents or plesiosaurs or mosasaurs or anything like that. But I'm pretty confident that there are at least some species of large animals to be discovered in the ocean still.
Yeah. Have they, you may not know this, but have they, like you hear all this talk about like alien bases and shit, but have they actually like looked at all of the the bottom of the ocean so they know there's nothing there?
Yes,
like an alien
yes
base?
and no.
Okay.
So 100% of the ocean has been mapped, but only to like a certain low resolution.
Okay.
High resolution mapping of the ocean is about 25% currently, which is still, I mean, a quarter of the ocean mapped, and we're talking to like within like 800 meters.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good resolution for the ocean. And there's a project currently, I think it's called Seabed 2030, and they are aiming to get as close to 100% as possible by 2030. I don't think they're going to hit 100% within the next 5 years, but they're sure going to try, and they've already made really good progress. Again, they've been the main ones pushing to get even to 25%.
Yeah.
So we do have a good idea of what like the bottom of the oceans look like, but that doesn't mean we've necessarily directly observed the bottom of the oceans.
Yeah.
That area that we've like directly observed by going down in like submersibles or by towing cameras over the bottom of the ocean is less than that. But of course, most animals aren't living at the bottom of the ocean. A lot of them are living in the open water column, and that's a lot harder to actually measure because it's constantly moving. You'll never be able to quantify how much of like the water column, the volume of water that you've actually mapped, because it's always moving. So
Yeah.
I can't really put a number on that, but that's definitely less explored.
Interesting. Now, yeah, because I remember when all that stuff happened with the submersible, it was like I never really gave it any thought. And then they're like, yeah, it's down this low. This is like so much lower than a whale can go down. I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize I figured a whale could just go everywhere. But apparently a whale can't swim to like the bottom of the ocean floor and back up like an garden.
No. Yeah, the deepest diving whales are usually like sperm whales, but also some of the beaked whales.
Yeah.
They can get between like 10 to 12,000 feet deep, but the ocean goes down to like 36,000 feet. So they can only actually traverse about a third of like the ocean's total depth.
Now, you heralded the rediscovery of the Marvin the Monster footage.
Yes, that
What do you
was
think of that? Because you
exciting.
seem like someone who would Yeah, we're talking about undersea creatures. What do you think that thing might be?
Well, I was loosely involved in the search for this footage, sort of.
Nice.
So initially, like, and this would have been just a couple of years ago, we only had 2 frames from the film that had been published, but nobody was sure where those frames had actually initially come from. So I guess I need to give some context.
Yeah, we talked about it a few weeks ago, but we can, we'll restate this for folks who might have missed that one and don't know what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah, so
tell Marvin, let's start out with what is this Marvin Monster footage that's missing?
So this would have been like 1962 off the coast of California. Shell Oil, the company, they had a deep sea robot called Mobot, like a marine robot.
Yeah.
And it had cameras attached to it, and it could be piloted remotely. And then the cameras had a television feed that hooked up to the surface. So they were, using this robot to like look at wellheads and inspect like the sea bottom.
Yeah.
So while they were doing that, I think it was like in the middle of the night, and there was a camera operator there, and they see this like bizarre creature like come into frame, and it's hard to describe like just in words. It's sort of like a corkscrew spiral shape, and then it's got like little bumps on it. And now we know what it looks like in motion because we have the actual footage, and it's sort of like moving up and down and spiraling.
Yeah.
But initially we just had the still frames. But the thing about this television camera is that it could not record footage on its own. That was just the limit of the technology at this time. It was a closed circuit TV. So what they had to do was set up a film camera pointed at the television monitor to actually take this film. So that's where the frames from the footage come from. And they are actually, it's like a photograph of the film strip. You can see like the edges of the reels.
So let me pause you just one moment there. So by virtue of them having to get the camera, so this thing must have been seen on a frequent basis then, because it certainly didn't like happen like you and I are talking, like it would take me, some time to get a camera to get all that shit in there. So clearly this was a recurring.
They managed to catch it the first time they saw it. However, the camera operator had already been observing it for several minutes.
Okay. All right.
It stayed within the camera for like over an hour, apparently.
Oh.
Although I don't know if it was filmed for that long.
Right.
But it did.
Oh,
It's
so
just a
gave
slow-moving creature. So it was there for an extended amount of time, enough that they had time to get the camera set up. Because they must have had it, because I assume they would have had to record certain footage of them inspecting like wellheads and stuff.
Oh,
so I bet he had the camera on hand and then had this actually probably set it up on a tripod. There is a photograph of this whole setup somewhere. And it shows, it's like a huge like cabinet. There's like the TV monitor, and there's a chair, and like then you've got the film camera next to it. So it's a clunky setup because that was the 1960s. So he took this film. What happened to this film has been unknown for a long time. We had just had 2 frames of the footage that had been photographed, but nobody really know where those frames had originally come from. So I did some digging. This would have been probably like 2 years ago already. And I found an article in Argosy magazine, a well-known men's magazine. They published a lot of cryptozoological stuff in the 1960s, especially like by Ivan Sanderson. But this article wasn't by him. It was by another author. So I think in 1966, they did a feature on Marvin the Monster. They had this glorious painting of a deep sea diver in like the classic helmet encountering Marvin. Of course, that didn't really happen. It was by a remote camera, but it's a great image. That's sort of like the header image on this article. But in that article, they have those 2 frames of the footage and a 3rd frame. So I was the one who actually discovered the 3rd frame. I posted it online, and I have a pretty high quality scan of it. So that's where the search was. We finally figured out where the frames of the footage had come from, those photographs. And we had a 3rd frame now instead of just 2.
Yeah.
And then somebody, I don't know their name. I don't think their like actual name has been released. They run like a YouTube channel, I think for like Spanish speaking cryptozoology enthusiasts. They had been watching through this old like children's TV show, I think from Venezuela, maybe some one of the Latin American countries. And this episode was like from 1989 or something. And they had been uploaded to this archive, like all the episodes. And this episode was just about like marine monsters in general. So the TV show host is like your typical kids show host, cracking jokes and stuff. And then they show the footage and there's commentary over it. And what do you know? There's footage of Marvin somehow on this TV show that nobody knew about. And that's how it was rediscovered. Somebody recognized it.
Yeah.
And this episode had been uploaded to YouTube in like 2009. So a long time ago, and nobody had noticed it until I think this year, like a few months ago. So that was, huge news. I was really excited for that. I did not have much hope that film would ever be rediscovered, and then there it is. And it includes the same footage that we see in the frames. Like you can match the published frames to that footage, so we know it's like exactly the same thing. And it's really cool to see footage from that area, because most of that stuff you just see in like still frames. There's not a lot of it that has been released as actual like video. And it's black and white, and the camera's sort of bobbing up and down with the current, and then the corkscrew animal is just sort of floating up and down in frame with it.
Yeah.
So there have been a lot of different ideas on what Marvin is. It's some kind of invertebrate animal. So not like a fish or like a reptile or anything. But it's probably not a squid or octopus. Some people suggest that it might have been like a tentacle reaching out, but it's not that. But like it's been suggested that it's like a siphonophore or a ctenophore or a salp chain or a pyrosome. And these are like the scientific names for these animals. Most of them don't really have common names, but they would be most similar to like a jellyfish, but like elongated into the shape of a worm. That's probably the best comparison I can think of without like getting too much into like the scientific terminology. But they're sort of gelatinous, like semi-transparent animals, and they can be like corkscrew shaped. And have like these bumps and ridges on them that look like Marvin. But unfortunately, it's hard to tell with the quality of the footage, like the smaller characteristics that would be able to identify it more confidently. Yeah. So it's still debated on what exactly type of animal it is, but it might be a species that has already been scientifically described. So it's not necessarily like a cryptid or an unknown species.
Right. Yeah.
It could be. We just don't know right now.
Yeah. It's like I don't know it's like a legend kind of in a way.
Yeah. It's sort of got an ambiguous status. Is it or is it not kind of thing?
Yeah. It's something that we had just gotten a glimpse of. So it's like, until now it became, now I guess, people can see it more. They can kind of maybe figure it out. Could they go back to like where it was filmed and just kind of like, do they know what animals live there and do a comparison?
Yeah. They theoretically could go back to like the coast of Southern California, and I can't remember exactly how deep it was taken, but it was fairly deep. And put cameras down there and see if you could observe the same type of animal again. It would be possible, but you'd also have to like convince a funding agency to fund. That would look like this animal that was one time in the 1960s on this little grainy video. You probably couldn't convince many people to fund you for that.
Yeah, for sure.
If you could get money, you could go do it. And theoretically, you could find the same type of animal again. Could still be out there. But then you run into the problem of that it could be extinct. That does happen probably with a lot of deep sea animals that we may have never actually like observed in their natural habitat, but may only have from like washed up carcasses. There are probably a lot of those that have gone extinct already because they haven't been observed alive. And the deep ocean is affected so heavily by pollution. And, of course, now they're proposing to do deep sea mining, which would make things even worse. So there are a lot of they're sort of like semi-cryptids. They're cryptid adjacent. And we have a specimen, we have a scientific name for them, but there's a good chance that they're extinct and that will never actually like confirmed observe them in the wild. So
odd. So is there not really a name for those kind of animals, is there?
No, there's not really. They don't get their own term.
Yeah, they should. Get on that in the taxonomy world. You could be like, you could be breaking new ground.
The thing with taxonomy is you don't actually have to name animals based on a physical specimen. That's not commonly known, but like some cryptids actually do have valid scientific names. You just have to name it based on a particular individual of an animal. That individual that does not actually have to be like stored in a museum.
Yeah.
As long as you have some sort of voucher, like a photograph or a video, or even like an illustration to put in a museum. the animal itself will still remain the type specimen. So there are some cryptids that have been named on like sightings, and those are actually like valid scientific names. Now, does that mean they're like a real species? Not necessarily, but they do still have scientific names. So,
Does Bigfoot?
oh, Bigfoot's got a couple proposed ones.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
It doesn't have like an official.
Not an official one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a whole story with Bigfoot scientific names. Then you get into like the Ketchum Project and her whole deal with them being like,
Oh, yeah.
and part human. Yeah.
That was a wild time.
But yeah, she created a scientific name from, I don't remember what it was, but it was like a species of Homo. She considered it to be a human rather than like an ape.
Yeah, and wasn't there like lemur involved too or something?
I don't remember. They found all sorts of weird stuff in their DNA.
Yeah.
Because they probably didn't do it right. But yeah.
Well, if they're finding lemur in it, I would say that's probably the case.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think this was your work, but maybe you were just highlighting that it came up, was this Iowan OOPART that was really just a fossilized tree.
Yeah,
So, what's this all about?
I stumbled across this while looking through books on like the Internet Archive. If you're ever looking for like old cryptozoology or like mystery books in general, UFOs, ghosts, anything like that, fringe topics, the Internet Archive has a lot of old books digitized.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I was looking through old books. I think it might have been one of Brad Steiger's books. He wrote a lot of these types of books, which are just, I don't know how you describe them. If it's like a stew of stuff where he just take random stories and like shove them together in a book. It's very little of his own writing. It's mostly copied from like old newspapers accounts. But he wrote tons of these books. And he was from Iowa. I'm also from Iowa originally. And of course, this particular object or artifact is also from Iowa. So there's the connections there. So he wrote about this newspaper account in one of his books. I think it was from like 1896 or 97.
Yeah.
But in a small town called Lehigh, Iowa, there was coal mining going on at that time. There were numerous like shafts and mines that run underneath the town, digging for coal in sediments that belong to an era we would call the Carboniferous period. So about like 300 to 330 million years old. At the time, the Earth would have had all sorts of like swampy forests, and then those trees would have decayed to make the coal. And then over time, they get turned into that from layers of rock, weighing down on them, and the pressure and the heat turning them into coal. So these miners were digging through that stuff, but they would occasionally find fossils. So what happened is that they found bark from a prehistoric tree called the Lepidodendron. That's the scientific name.
Yeah.
And this tree has bark that is arranged in like sort of diamonds, like interlocking diamonds. And then within each diamond, there's like sort of ridges and bumps that almost look like a human face. And that's what happened. So they had found this, and they didn't know that it was a tree. They thought it was some sort of carving or human-made artifact, and that the bark of the tree, like that these were actually like little carved faces on this rock.
Yeah.
So then it got picked up by the newspaper, and of course, it's one of those classic like old weird stories that always gets repeated in books.
Yeah.
Repeated is the subsequent discussion on the specimen. So pretty soon after, I don't remember the name of the guy, but he had written his own like newspaper article about it. And he had actually correctly identified. He said, I heard about this article in the newspapers. It's not a carving. I've read geology and paleontology books. It's a lepidodendron, It's got bark with these interlocking diamonds, and they've got little sort of like face-like structures on them.
Yeah.
So it's not a human-made object. It's just a fossil. But of course, this gets picked up by the mystery mongering literature. It's a human artifact that is 300 million years old. How is this possible? That changes everything we know about history. And that's where the term OOPART comes from. It's out of place artifact.
Right.
Really coined by Ivan Sanderson, the famous cryptozoologist, but he also wrote about a lot of other mystery subjects. So that's why I called my post that. It's an Iowan OOPART, an out of place artifact from Iowa, but it's not actually an artifact. It's a fossil. So I wanted to write the article, a brief blog post about that, just to dispel, say, no, it's not actually an artifact, because there are even recent books that have still been citing it as like evidence for ancient humanity. Like, I think I found one as recently as like 2013, some book about giants and like how everything you've been taught about history is wrong. That kind of.
Yeah. And they include that. Where do we know where this thing is now?
No, I
it's
have
like on display in the town museum or something like that.
I have speculations that it might have been sent to the Smithsonian. Now, the miners at Lehigh had found other fossils and had actually sent them to the Smithsonian before. So in 1894, just a few years before the tree was discovered, they had actually found the teeth of a prehistoric shark in the mine of a shark called Adestus, a scissor-tooth shark.
Oh, wow.
They've got these really gnarly, they've just got a single row of teeth, but they sort of interlock, and they've got like triangular points, like one of those like
cartoon.
Yeah, almost like a cartoon scissors, or like one of those scissors that you use to cut like pattern. And they had found the teeth of that and sent it to the Smithsonian, and it was eventually identified and named as its own species, Adestus mirus, the wonderful biter, is what the scientific name means. And that was described in the scientific literature. So I also have suspicions that this tree may have got sent to the Smithsonian for identification, but since it's a fairly common fossil, like not nearly as remarkable as a shark, it was never actually like scientifically written up. But I'm not for sure. It'd be hard. I mean, I'd have to do some serious digging through like archives and records to find that out.
Yeah, they'd be like, "Why'd you send us this tree fossil?"
Yeah, it's fairly common fossils. So
yeah, interesting. I bet you it is still mentioned to this day. People don't even probably gloss all over that. So you were a consultant with Walking with Dinosaurs, which is a very popular show, and you consulted. This is what I was saying earlier, folks. Tyler's a serious scientist. He consulted on the Sawskate
Onchopristis.
Yeah. Onchopristis. He consulted on the Sawskate Onchopristis in episode 2. Let me see what it says. The River Dragon. So,
yes.
What is this thing? So, how do you get mixed up with being a consultant? They call you. They're like, "Look, we need get fucking Tyler Greenfield in here right now. Get him in here. We need to get the Sawskate under control."
So I had gotten basically just a cold email out of the blue, and this would have been like the spring or early summer of 2023. There's a lot of dates to remember. I'm trying to get approximate, but I think it would have been spring or early summer of 2023. And I just got an email out of the blue from the BBC science department. They said, we're making it. Well, they didn't say that right away. Initially, the project had a code name. It was originally called Project Atlas, but I had figured out through like contextual clues that it was going to be the next Walking with Dinosaurs. They eventually told me, but so I got an email from the BBC to science department. They said, we're making an episode about Spinosaurus, the big sail-backed meat-eating dinosaur that lived in Africa about 100 million years ago. We need a consultant for one of the fish that Spinosaurus would have eaten, and that's the Sawskate Onchopristis. Would you be willing to be a consultant on it? And first, I had to do some research. I said, okay, is this legit? Is this actually like the BBC science department? Me? But it was the real deal. Said, okay, I will be your consultant. I sent them a whole bunch of my research materials, like a whole portfolio. I had actually written several blog posts and even some papers about this animal previously. And I'd even done my own like illustrations and reconstructions. So I sent them all of that.
Wow.
And then they said that was good. That's what they needed to get started. And then they didn't get back to me for about another year, I think. And within a year, they had actually finished the model. So then it was my job to actually critique like the 3D model their animators had made, give them feedback, what needs to be changed, what can stay, if it's anatomically correct or not. Recommendations for like how it should swim and move, what color it should be, like down to every last detail.
Yeah.
So I did that I think in like 2024, and then it was finalized. And the program actually came out earlier this spring in 2025.
Yeah.
So it was like a whole 2-year process.
That's awesome.
That's how I got to be a consultant on that, mainly just because of what I had written already. And because I'm one of the few people who really knows anything about this particular group of animals. I suppose I haven't really explained what they are yet.
The Sawskate Onchopristis.
Yeah, so Sawskates are a group of cartilaginous fishes. They're rays, like related to stingrays and manta rays and fish that are called skates. Those would be their closest living relatives. Sawskates in particular lived in the Cretaceous period from around like 125 to like 66 million years ago.
Yeah.
So they're a totally extinct group. They're not alive to today, but they have convergently evolved like an elongated rostrum, a nose with spiky tentacles on the side, sort of like a modern sawfish or saw shark.
Okay.
So we have similar animals alive today, but the fact that they evolved this structure is completely coincidental. They're not closely related to sawfishes or saw sharks. And indeed, I had actually proposed to give them the name saw skates. We call them that because of me.
Wow.
Initially, they had just been called sawfishes because they look similar enough. But again, they're not actually related. It's misleading to call them that. Visually, they're very distinct. They have all sorts of different anatomical characteristics that distinguish them. So I said, hey, we probably should be calling them a separate thing. So I wrote a paper about it, and now we call them saw skates.
Wow. You changed the name of an animal. That's pretty awesome. Wow.
Yeah, and then Onchopristis is a specific like genus and species that would have lived with Spinosaurus
At that time or whatever. Yeah.
And it's particularly gnarly. It has these really like asymmetrical, wicked hooked spikes on its snout, and it's also got spikes all along its back. I mean, it's one of the craziest looking animals that has ever lived. It's really insane. And I was the first to really figure out exactly what it looked like. We had various parts of its skeleton, its skull, its snout, some of its teeth, and like parts of the skeleton, but nobody had ever really put them together. Exactly what it looked like. So I was the first to make a scientifically rigorous reconstruction of Onchopristis, and that's the basis for the model in the show.
Wow. How do you do that? Like you take the pieces, you kind of, is this with the computer? How do you?
Yeah, I do all my reconstructions digitally. You have to take photographs and drawings from scientific papers. You have to make sure they're measured and scaled correctly. And then you compare them with their modern relatives to see how the pieces fit back together.
Okay.
Then you have to restore missing pieces. For a lot of these specimens, they were actually crushed by the fossilization process, flattened. So I had to sort of like reinflate them what they would have looked like when the animal would have been alive.
Wow.
I mean, it took a lot of work. I don't even know how many hours I spent making that reconstruction. Yeah, I made a digital drawing of it, the skeleton, but also like what it would have looked like when it was live with the skin on and the coloration and soft tissues and things like that.
Was this the aforementioned river dragon of the?
The river dragon is the dinosaur, the Spinosaurus,
that was eating the
Onchopristis, and we do have direct fossil evidence of their interaction. We found a snout from this Spinosaurus, the dinosaur, with one of the vertebrae, the backbones of the Onchopristis, like wedged into one of its two sockets. So it was eating it, and then the bone had popped off and got stuck in its tooth. And then there's another Spinosaurus jaw that has one of the spikes from the Onchopristis actually stabbed into it. So we know that the Onchopristis could fight back. It would swing its snout, and the spikes could actually like get stuck in whatever was attacking it. So that's is also based on fossil evidence.
Is that depicted in the Walking with Dinosaurs?
Yes, yeah.
I gotta check.
Spinosaurus is shown eating the Onchopristis.
And where? That's from BBC. Is that on like BritBox or something? How can people watch it here in America?
Here in America, you should be able to watch it on PBS. It was a BBC PBS co-production, so you should still be able to watch it for free. I think even without any registration on the PBS website. And yeah, if you're in the UK, you can watch it for free on BBC. Outside of the US or the UK, I'm not sure. You'd probably have to pirate it or buy a physical copy. I think there's supposed to be a DVD coming out sometime soon. But yeah, you can at least watch it for free here on PBS.
All right. And it's like 3D. Yeah, it's like all reconstructions, like Walking with Dinosaurs.
Yeah, 3D models. Yeah. And there's also modern footage of dig sites showing how the specimens involved in the reconstructions have actually been discovered and excavated.
Oh.
So there is some live action, like footage of paleontologists doing their work. And then there is the 3D modeling recreations of the prehistoric animals themselves.
Nice. The USS Stein incident. You may have solved this case. You think you. I don't know. I hadn't heard about it until I was reading your blog, and then I was like, oh. But apparently, it's a fairly well-known sort of cryptozoological legend in a sense.
Yeah, another famous like weird story that gets repeated all the time, but nobody like really has ever read the original sources or done it. Serious investigative work on. So I wrote a post on it a couple years ago. I had gotten interested in the story. I had to track down the original sources. I mean, it just had been repeated, but without any indication of where the story had come from. In and it had initially been reported in the U.S. Naval Institute's magazine, and then it had also been featured in Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, the TV show. So the magazine article was in '78, I think, and then Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, that episode came out in 1980, I think. So that's where that incident had actually been initially reported. Although it's fairly light on details, we're not even sure exactly what year it was when it happened.
Yeah.
So I think it had initially been reported that it had happened in 1978. That was like the common date ascribed to it. But that was just the year when it was first reported. I had done some like searching and some like contextual clues to sort out that it had actually probably happened in 1972 instead. Sort of like when the USS Stein was making its like test voyage as an initial like maiden voyage when the ship was brand new. So I'm pretty sure it had happened sometime in 1972 instead of like later dates like 1978. That was just when it was first reported to the public. I've even seen a source reported as happening in 1985, which is of course possible. Something can't happen in 1985 if it was reported in 1978.
Right.
So there's all sorts of confusion about when this actually happened. But the story goes is that the Stein is out on a voyage somewhere. I have not been able to pinpoint an exact location. The companion book to the TV show, the Mysterious World show, stated that it was somewhere off the coast of South America near the equator. But I have recently gotten some possible testimony from a sailor serving on the Stein at that time, indicating that it may have actually happened in Puget Sound, which I think is in Washington, or off the coast of Washington. I have not been able to verify that person's identity yet, though. Fair warning. So I'm not sure if they actually served at that time or not. But there have been conflicting reports on where exactly it happened, South America or maybe the U.S. But while the ship is out to sea, they have a sonar dome mounted on the front of the ship for searching for submarines, particularly Soviet submarines at that time. And suddenly the sonar equipment just goes haywire. It stops working, and they have no idea why that's happening because they haven't hit anything. There's no obvious like visual damage to the ship at this time, so there's no idea why that's happened. So they have to return to port. They go into dry dock to actually examine the sonar dome, and the sonar dome has this rubber coating on it that's to prevent like barnacles and other sea life from attaching to it. It's a no foul coating. And it's got like all these scratch marks on it. And in some of these scratch marks are embedded like these tiny little hooks or sort of like tooth-like objects. So the idea at the time is that the ship has been attacked by some kind of giant squid of an unknown species. Now, they don't really say how big it is in the initial reports. They're just like, it's just a big squid. The hooks are coming from its arms. A lot of squids have like actually like hooks on the suckers. So it's then scratching the dome with its tentacles, and then the hooks get wrenched off and stuck in the dome. Just some kind of giant squid of unknown species, possibly a new species. That's really all that is said. There's nothing overly sensational in the original reports. But of course, that changes when people don't read the original reports and they just parrot stuff and it gets watered down as you go down the line.
Yeah.
So modern retellings of the story have it that the Stein was attacked by a 150-foot-long colossal squid. And there's just no evidence for that. And I don't even think the squid was an unknown species or even particularly large. So I actually looked at the video footage showing some of the damage to the sonar dome. There's also photographs of it as well. You can see the rubber coating and it's got the tears in it. And then there's also footage of like at least one of the hooks that had been recovered from that rubber coating. And they're not as big as you think they were. So in the initial reports, they had it that like some of these scratches were like 4 feet long. So pretty big. But in the photographs, the largest scratches are maybe only like 2 inches long. They're much smaller. And the hook itself, somebody, it's one of the naval biologists, I think Forrest Wood, he's on camera like holding it up between his fingers. And you can see that his hook is pretty small. It's only about the length of his thumbnail. Based on like the average, there's not any exact measurements, but based on like the average length of an adult male fingernail, I calculated that this hook is probably only like a centimeter long, like not even an inch. And there are plenty of squids that have hooks this size. This is still a fairly large hook. But the thing is that a small squid can have proportionally large hooks relative to its body. And I think that's exactly what happened here. There's a group of squids called the hook club squids or the club tooth squids. They've got various common names, but their scientific name, they're the family Onychoteuthidea, and specifically the genus Onychoteuthis. And they do live off the Pacific coast of the Americas. And they're very small. Maximum like body length is only like 3 feet, which is pretty small for a squid. But they have these huge clubs on the end of their tentacles that have, just massive hooks relative to the size of their body. Oh. And I think what happened is that one of these little squids was somehow attracted by this sonar dome, scratched it all up, and left a few of the hooks from its tentacles in that dome. So I don't see any reason to invoke some like super massive giant squid of unknown species here. I think it was probably a pretty small squid. But this is a good example showing you that cryptozoological research is not always the most thorough. Don't always take stories you hear in books at face value, because a lot of people have never read the original sources. They're just parroting it from other people. And those people have been parroting it from other people. Yeah. Those people have been parroting it from other people, and just gets distorted down the line. Dates get mixed up, locations get mixed up, the people involved get mixed up, and people don't usually care about the details, even though they really need to, because they're important contextual details that can be assessed to determine the credibility or validity of the sighting. And the USS Stein incident is a prime case. It's how a fairly mundane animal attack from a small squid gets turned into this mysterious incident of a giant unknown species. So that's what I concluded. It's not really anything out of the ordinary.
Yeah, well, it is very interesting. I think it says something about us, I guess, where it's like they couldn't fathom that, like, it had to have been something as powerful as our ship or whatever, it couldn't have been some little thing. But it's like birds fly into engines and take them down of planes all the time. So, well, not all the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even really think about that, but yeah, sort of the might of the U.S. Navy. How could it be possible that a squid that is only maybe like this long could take out our highly advanced equipment? But it did. And this similar things actually happened with the Navy with their sonar equipment. They also got attacked by sharks. And indeed, some of these attacks were actually reported in the same article that the Stein incident was initially reported in. There's a small shark called a cookie cutter shark. It's only about like 3 feet long, but it has teeth like all locked together, a single row in the upper jaw and a single row in the lower jaw. And what it does is that it latches onto its prey, and then it brings those teeth together and will, like a cookie cutter, will take a chunk out of their prey. That's how they feed. So they leave these like hole-shaped marks on their prey. But they have also been recorded attacking sonar domes and taking little cookie cutter chunks out of the sonar domes. And initially the Navy had no idea what they were, because at the time it was not known that that's how cookie cutter sharks had fed. They had been captured as like specimens, but had never been observed feeding on animals in the wild. So it took them forever to figure out that it was actually these tiny little sharks that were cutting holes into their sonar domes. So there's even similar incidents that happen with other small animals to show them that that's possible.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Now, do you know so much about sharks? This is kind of a ridiculous question. Forgive me, we're getting toward the end, but do you enjoy Shark Week, or do you think it's like, are you like over it because you know so much? Because I don't watch like paranormal TV shows, because it's like I do paranormal all day, all the time. So I don't really. So how do you feel about Shark Week?
I'm mostly over it. Yeah. I still watch a few of the programs every year if they look interesting. There was one this last year that wasn't too bad, about the Malpelo monster, which is a shark that is sometimes covered in cryptozoological books, even though it's not actually a cryptid. It's been sighted around Malpelo Island, which is off the coast of Colombia, somewhat near the Galapagos Islands. And it's a known species called the small-toothed sand tiger, Odontaspis ferox. So we've known about this species for 200 years. It's just that these individuals in this population tend to be a little bit larger than usual. Yeah. And it's also like not a very common species. So back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of commercial divers in that area misidentified it as potentially being a new species. So it did make its way into some like cryptid encyclopedias as the Marvin Monster, this unknown species of shark. But then through DNA testing and like through hours of like video observation, they eventually figured out that it was just an unknown species. So there was a program on that during this last Shark Week, I think with Josh Gates and his team. It might have been like the Expedition Unknown show. And they actually did conclude that at the end of the episode. Of course, they've got to lead the episode with the mystery, right? But by the end of the episode, they did reveal that it was the known species, not anything new. I was actually pretty surprised that they did that, because usually they just play up the mystery and then not resolve it by the end of the show.
Right.
I have to give them the kudos for that, because usually a Shark Week show wouldn't do that. So I do watch a few of the shows every year if they look interesting, and sometimes they turn out to be okay. Not the most informative, but not misleading either. But a lot of them are pretty bad, especially since they did that whole Megalodon mockumentary about 10 years ago. The quality has significantly declined, and there are a lot of shows that are just outright fake.
So refresh my memory, what's the Megalodon? Was it like a fake documentary? Okay, tell me about this.
In 2013, they made this whole production, a whole like, I think it might have been like even like a 2-hour long special.
Yeah, like a big
Megalodon, the monster shark lives, and it was all about how Megalodon is actually alive. What's interesting is that they didn't actually draw on any of like the sightings or any of like the evidence that is usually featured in like the literature. They actually fabricated their own footage. They had like CGI models of Megalodon and put them interacting with like real people. Yeah. Also like a fake washed up whale carcass that had a huge bite taken out of it. They produced all sorts of like fake new evidence just for this show, just to fool people. And they had actors posing as scientists. They're like, yeah, we've been trying to tell people that the Megalodon is real, but then the U.S. government is covering it up. So there was the whole conspiracy angle too.
No, hold on. Let me. I got to ask. So, I don't know. Maybe you're getting to it. So when did they let people know it wasn't real? Was it like they just going from the very beginning? Was it like a disclaimer?
There was a small, like in fine text disclaimer, I think at the very beginning and at the very end, but nothing in the middle. And just, I mean, again, like the smallest text possible that they could probably get away with without getting sued. Okay. And it just flashed on screen quickly, and then it was right into the Megalodon is still alive. The government is covering it up. And that's how it was like for the whole show. And then at the end, again, there was like the very little disclaimer. And of course, I mean, it ignited like a firestorm on social media. People were like, this is real. This is crazy.
Right.
And of course, then scientists have to come out here and be like, no, this is all fake. The scientists in this show are actors. They've got pages on IMDb. They've been in other like fictional projects before. Like this whole thing is just a farce. But then Discovery, and it's almost inexplicable why they would do this after all the backlash. But the next year they doubled down on it. They made another fake program, Megalodon: The New Evidence, and it featured the same like actors posted. It featured new fake evidence. And they just, they did the whole thing over again. Or like, no, it was actually real. And of course, they've got the little disclaimers. Again,
it's like they're Sharknado or something. They're like, we're gonna. They thought. I bet they were like, people got so pissed.
I don't know why.
Let's do it again.
Why they ever thought it was a good idea to do, but they did it, and they got hate for it, and that was sort of the beginning of the end for Shark Week. But that's not. I mean, that's not even the extent of the problem, because there were other fake shows that were less clear about being fake.
Yeah,
like. There was one about a supposed giant great white shark, I think called like Submarine or something that's supposed to be like 30 feet long. There's also another one about a giant hammerhead that I kid you not called Old Hitler.
What?
Really? Yes. They made a program about this, about a giant hammerhead like 30 feet long off the coast of Florida, and had been called Old Hitler because it had initially been sighted during the 1940s while World War II was going on.
So it's all completely fabricated.
And this was all completely fabricated. These were not real local legends. There were no giant hammerheads, but no disclaimers on this one. And actual scientists got tricked into appearing on the program. So no actors this time.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think they ever came out and said they were fake, but people figured out. They're like, no, like there's no local legends about this.
Yeah.
the scientists involved are like, we had no knowledge about this. We thought it was just going to be a program about normal great whites and normal hammerheads, but they've made up this whole fake story to it. So there were other programs that were even more misleading that never really got the same exposure as the Megalodon did.
Gee.
And I haven't watched a lot of these programs, but I'd be willing to bet that there have been more in subsequent years that they have not been honest about and that contain fabricated details.
I bet. That's insane.
Yeah, so
I didn't know
Shark Week
when.
as a whole, mostly over it. Occasionally watch some things if they look interested.
Did they do a mermaid one? I thought I was. Yeah, they did.
That wasn't for Shark Week. That was actually Animal Planet did that. They're like a
okay.
sister network to Discovery. So
Right. It's all
same people behind the scenes. But
yeah.
it was just an Animal Planet special. And they did it was sort of like the precursor, the template for the Meg documentaries or mockumentaries.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was the same format. Actors posing as scientists. The government is covering it up. We've made up our own evidence with like CGI. But this time it was mermaids instead of Megalodon.
Okay, so it was like a test run essentially to see if
it was a dry run for the Megalodon stuff, really, is what it was. And they even created like this elaborate backstory for how these mermaids would have evolved. Like they were actually aquatic apes. So then they bring like the aquatic ape pseudoscience.
Oh wow.
Into it. So there's even more to it than that. But yeah, it was the test run for the Megalodon stuff.
Interesting. Wow. All right. Jeez. Now, one last one before I let you go. This kind of captures both your interest in a way. So, Loch Ness Monster. It feels outside of your realm, but you must have an opinion. You like dinosaurs. You're doing the dinosaur thing. You like dinosaurs. He's a paleontologist, folks. I apologize. You're a paleontologist, and you like cryptids. We can go with that because anyone can be a cryptozoologist. Hell, I can be one. So you're a paleontologist and you have an interest in cryptids. So you must have an opinion on the Loch Ness Monster. What are your thoughts on it?
I don't think it's a real unknown animal. I think the sightings can't be explained by any one factor, though. I think some of the sightings are misidentifications of like weather and wave phenomenon. We know, that boat wakes especially are often mistaken for the monster on the lake. They can linger long after the boat is gone, and they'll form sort of like a trail in the water. But there's also like atmospheric phenomena, mists and reflections. There's even like inanimate objects like logs and floating debris and overturned boats. There's any sorts of like objects and natural phenomenon that can cause that. But there's also misidentified animals, swimming deer, some birds maybe. Each and every one sighting probably has a potential explanation that is different from the other. And of course, there's always hoaxes and fake photos. Pretty much all the classics are fake. Like the Sturgeon's photo with the neck.
That's a good one. Yeah.
It was a fake. Yeah. It was a toy submarine. And yeah. So I don't think it's a real unknown animal. However, I did get involved in a controversy related to Nessie.
Oh.
Where my words got taken out of context to imply that I believe that Nessie was a giant frog.
How do you, what?
So this would have been like the summer of 2022, I think.
Yeah.
So I posted on social media something. Oh, I know what it was. So in 2007, there had been a survey of the loch bottom. And while they were doing this survey, taking photographs and videos, they had captured a toad at the bottom of the loch, 300 feet deep, but it was still alive. It was just sitting there at the bottom of the loch. So there's this great photo. It's pitch black, just the muddy bottom, and then there's a toad just sitting at the bottom. So I said, hey, here's this cool photograph of a toad 300 feet deep at the bottom of Loch Ness. And then like in a subsequent follow-up to that, I said, it had gotten the wheels turning in my mind. I said, has anyone actually ever suggested that Nessie was a giant frog before? I bet somebody has, but I'd be curious to know if that had ever been proposed as an idea. I was not suggesting that myself. I obviously don't believe that Nessie could even be a giant frog.
Right.
But then the Daily Star, which is a UK.
Oh, wow. I think I remember. I think I remember this story going around. Yeah.
They picked up the story. And it got taken far and wide. I think it even appeared in 40 Times. They picked up the story. Paleontologists suggest that Nessie is a giant frog. Of course, that's not at all what I said.
Right.
So I wrote to them, and they ended up doing a correction and said, no, he actually doesn't think it's a giant frog. But yeah, for a little while there, I went viral because everybody
I do
thought that
remember
I
that.
thought that Nessie was a giant frog.
Yeah, I remember that because
So never trust what the press says. Because
no, not at all.
words are-
Yeah, that's wild. So generally, we wrap it up with like, what's next for you? But you have an exciting and interesting life where you're so busy. It's like, take me, I guess, in a way. Like, what is next for you? You dusting off fossils and shit tomorrow or whatever? Like, what kind of stuff are you doing? It's interesting work.
Yeah, I'm still working on all my paleontological projects, which is a lot of them. I mean, stuff related to my master's and future doctoral work. So that'll involve, looking at more fossils, doing more sifting and preparation and,
Wow.
and writing all that up. And of course, all the research and reading and writing
Teaching classes or something, right?
Yeah, that TAing for classes, grading papers, informing the next generation about paleontology. So all that stuff related to paleontology, but then I've got plenty of planned cryptozoology stuff too. Unfortunately, paleontology often has to take priority in my life because there's more urgency to it. Cryptozoologists are content a lot of times just to repeat what other people are saying and not to produce new research. Not so for paleontology. Everybody is always producing new research at a breakneck pace. So if I want to get stuff done, it's just got to get out there. So paleontology usually takes priority, but I am working on cryptozoology related stuff in the background. I mentioned earlier, I do have a follow-up to my Megalodon cryptid paper in the works. It won't be nearly as long, but there's some more sightings and more references I want to discuss. And there's also some updates and corrections I need to do to my earlier paper. I'm always reading, so I've found all sorts of new information that I need to add to that body of evidence. But I'm also working on other projects, mostly shark related. I've got one that I've recently been researching about the Timor sea shark, which is allegedly an unknown species, but I've discovered that it doesn't actually come from the Timor Sea. It comes from Australia, and there's been a whole mix-up in how that's been reported. It's not actually an unknown species, but it's actually two different known species. So I'm working on that, and then I've also started on another project about a supposed sea serpent that washed up in New Zealand, I think in 1912. And it's actually the first ever record of a rare species of shark. It was just never correctly identified. So I've been able to identify it by comparing it to different specimens and my readings. So we got that, not a sea serpent, a new shark. And then there's, other various shark related stuff. I want to do one about Nessie someday, because there's been an idea proposed. It was made really popular by Jeremy Wade on River Monsters.
Yeah.
That the Nessie could be a Greenland shark or a sleeper shark that went into the loch. But that's just not correct at all. They don't actually enter fresh water. He was mistaken. He believed they enter like freshwater lakes and rivers when they don't actually.
Yeah.
I want to write about that someday. And then I've even got stuff about Bigfoot that I want to write about. I know we haven't really talked about Bigfoot, but I am interested in that too.
What?
Mainly about. I'm mostly interested in like the historical Bigfoot case, the recent one. Mainly because I think historical Bigfoot is kind of a misnomer. I think a lot of the stories from that era don't actually belong together and represent different story types. So you've probably heard about like Teddy Roosevelt's Bigfoot story, right?
Yeah.
It's not actually his story. He didn't encounter the creature.
Yeah, he told it secondhand. Like,
But he heard it secondhand. So I'm doing an analysis of that story because there's way more to it than has ever been reported. It turns out that Teddy did not even believe the story was about some kind of monster. He actually believed it was a mundane animal attack, possibly from a bear or a cougar, but that's never been reported on before. Most sources like to imply that Teddy actually believed this story was some kind of monster, but he did not. And again, there's really nothing about that story that actually specifically ties it to Bigfoot. The creature was never actually really seen in any detail, and there's no like specific characteristics it actually shares with Bigfoot. I think it's incorrectly gotten lumped in with it over the years. But I've also got another one I want to do on the Jacko hoax. You may have also heard of that one.
Jacko.
Yeah. So
what was that?
It was in 1884 in Yale, British Columbia, not Yale the college, in a small town, and this would have been the wilderness at that time, mining town, I think.
Yeah.
And there was a newspaper story about how Jacko the gorilla had escaped and was on a rampage. And it's obviously a prank story.
Yeah.
Jacko is actually like, and people have not figured this out yet, but I've done the research and like traced the name back. The name itself actually has significance.
Okay.
Jacko was actually like a stereotypical name for monkeys and like gorillas and other apes in the 1800s. So saying you have a gorilla named Jacko on the loose is like saying you have a dog named Fido or Rover on the loose. Like it's an obvious like joke that people would have understood at that time.
Gotcha.
But the context has been lost. And there's more to the story than that. Escaped like animal pranks were a common newspaper like hoax in the 1800s.
Really?
Yes. A lot of times they were said to come from circuses and that they had just gotten loose, and that was a great way to like get people riled up on a slow news day.
Wow.
There's other aspects, like Jacko was said to like break off sticks, and there's a common like artistic motif in the 1800s of monkeys and apes walking upright and using like sticks as canes. So there's even like tying into like traditional folklore here.
Okay.
But none of this stuff has ever been realized before. Some people have realized that it has been a newspaper hoax, but have not dug into it in too much detail. Like I think John Green, the famous Bigfooter, first exposed the Jacko story as being a hoax, but he didn't look into like the name or like the folkloric connections. He just thought it was just a ridiculous newspaper story. That actually dug into it and done the research, and now I've got more of a smoking gun that this is not a true story. But it's still, I mean, even with John Green, one of the four horsemen of Sasquatchery, talking about it, it still gets repeated in Bigfoot books as being a true story.
Yeah.
There was a Bigfoot on the loose at this time, and Jacko was supposedly captured and sent off to a museum for study. So then there's that aspect of it.
Oh, wow.
And you get the conspiracy side of it. That this body was sent to a museum, but it's been hidden because they don't want us to know the truth about Bigfoot. But of course, none of this ever actually happened. It was all a joke, a prank that most people living at that time would have understood. They would have understood the name, and like Jacko's behavior was all just a joke.
Yeah.
That cultural context has been lost, and that you see that a lot of people in the modern day reading these old newspaper accounts and just absolutely failing to understand what any of them actually mean.
Right. Yeah.
Their meaning would have been perfectly clear, even to relatively like uneducated people at that time. It would have been a great laugh, a great way to like entertain people when there wouldn't have been very much news, but nobody would have ever taken it very seriously. It's our modern researchers. Yeah, well, not like you.
In a way, like a reverse meme in a sense. Like if you came back, if you went back there and showed them a meme, they wouldn't understand what the hell.
That's true. But people taking them at face value as being like 100% literal accounts of like unknown animals on the loose, just not understanding the context behind them. So I even have stuff about Bigfoot that I like to write about someday.
Well, two things. First, you should write a book like that sort of has these stories and sort of explains the real background to them. That would be a really interesting book.
I've been hesitant.
I mean, they're on the blog kind of. So.
I've been hesitant to actually like commit to writing a book.
Oh yeah, no, not now. You're too busy becoming a doctor.
I usually prefer to write things like as articles or papers, just to get individual cases out there in like a timely manner. But I have thought about like collecting them all in a book someday. But anything I would write, I would probably publish as like its own thing first. And then like collect it into a book. One idea I did have for a book all on its own, and maybe not necessarily like an article though. I in the course of my research, I have been finding a lot of obscure like crypto fiction stories.
What do you mean?
Stories about cryptids, but that have like never been reprinted. Like stuff from the early 1900s and back into the 1800s about various unknown animals, some more well known than others. And these stories have like never been reprinted in any short story collections. They've been like totally forgotten about, but they have interesting connections to real world like cryptozoology. They're based on like cryptozoological literature, and they've incorporated that into fiction. Like there's one story that I'm working on writing about from 1931, and it's about like a giant great white shark, like 40 feet long. Now, great white sharks don't actually get this large, but these giant great white sharks have been considered a part of cryptozoology before, and even like sort of tied in with the Megalodon stuff. They're sort of tangentially related to that. But this story has a giant great white shark that attacks people in it in 1931, which is way before Jaws or like shark attack fiction became like a common thing. So it's an interesting story, and I'd like to write an essay about it. But there's some other stories that I would also like to write essays about, but also just reprint the story so that people even find out about them. I mean, some of these are like the most obscure of the most obscure, printed in regional magazines, printed in books that only a few copies exist of. Like,
and these stories never made it into. So when you say they're
forgotten, never discussed by cryptozoologists or by like people who study fiction in general, they're like totally forgotten, but they're really interesting.
Are they like
yeah,
not just aquatic? Are they like humanoid creatures?
No, there's some terrestrial ones. Like there's one about a supposed cryptid, variously called the Carvana or the Kawana. I was recently looking into this one. And it's supposedly like an alligator turtle hybrid.
Okay.
It's like this horrible monster that lives in swamps and eats men and horses, in California of all places.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I kind of see where you're going. So it's kind of like the fearsome creatures of the lumber woods or whatever.
Yeah, but this one is weird because it actually has connections with a real animal.
Yeah.
So initially the stories didn't start out in California. Initially they had come from further south and to the east in Louisiana. Now in Louisiana, the local word for the alligator or snapping turtle in like Louisiana French, like an archaic word would be, I'm probably not going to pronounce it right. It's like the Coan or the Cowan. That's the word for the alligator snapping turtle. And then that got distorted into Kawana or Carvana. So this mythological, like horrible monster is actually sort of a distortion of like the very real alligator snapping turtle, which if you've ever seen one, like does look like a hybrid between a turtle and an alligator.
Right.
You know, they've got the turtle like shell, but they got big spikes on them. They got a fearsome jaws that can snap, bite, and they're huge. So that's another one that has like real world connections, and that has bizarrely enough even appeared in at least one cryptozoological encyclopedia as being like a possible real cryptid. Even though it comes from fiction and it's a distortion of a real animal, it has at least one point been considered as a possible unknown animal as well. So there's all sorts of stories like that I would eventually like to write about someday. But I might release them as separate articles first. I might collect them in a book. I don't know. Yeah, that's a ways off.
Yeah. One thing that kind of came up while we've been chatting here. What about these sort of apocryphal stories of people they find giants?
Ooh, that.
Have you kind of like looked into this or thought about it?
A little bit, but it's starting to get out of like my wheelhouse and like what I can do. Because I'm also interested in all sorts of weird stuff, you know, pseudo history and even like a little bit of the UFO stuff. I do have an interest in it, but eventually I just have to say like I don't really have enough time to dedicate.
Right.
I'm still more interested in like the paleontological, cryptozoological stuff more so than like archaeological, ufological, but I have done some research into like the finding giant phenomenon. I think most of it is blown way out of proportion.
Oh, I'm certain of that.
Like with the Jackal hoax, I think the majority of them are jokes, and that the modern people reading them and wanting to see them as giants are not understanding that they're jokes. Like it was a really common joke, like a punchline even to put at the end of your crazy story about finding any kind of like bizarre animal or buried skeleton or anything. Well, it will be sent to the Smithsonian or some kind of museum for study. That's a joke. It's not like a serious statement. That even like the great white story I was telling you about from 1931, it also ends with that. Like we killed this giant great white that's 40 feet long and we sent it off to the Smithsonian for study. So it even appears in fiction sometimes, but it is a common joke that would have been culturally understood by people at the time. Like, oh yeah, that's like the giveaway that this whole thing is fake. But modern authors have often taken that way too literally because again, they come in with preconceived notions. They already want giants to be real. They already want there to be some kind of conspiracy that they can expose and be special for exposing. So they take it as literal fact that the Smithsonian just has like all these giants that have been sent to them by like everybody from everywhere. But of course, they never got sent to the Smithsonian because they never existed, because they were just stories. And because it was a very easy kind of joke story to tell. I mean, a giant human is not that hard to imagine. You know, giants have been a staple in human literature and culture for thousands of years. And we find bones here in America. We find bones, especially like there were lots of stories about finding giant bones in mounds, right? And you find normal human bones in these burial mounds all the time. So it's not a stretch to like extrapolate that to being a giant person that you find in this bone. It's a very easy, simple kind of story to tell that you can repeat a lot of times and sell to different newspapers. So it's just a joke. It's entertainment. But people take it seriously. There's whole books dedicated to like collating these newspaper accounts and taking them at 100% face value, like trying to tally up the total number of giant skeletons of the Smithsonian must have. You know, it's in the thousands because there were thousands of these stories. And they're a totally ubiquitous story type. So I mean, but all this research doesn't really mean anything because their analysis is totally flawed because none of this stuff ever actually happened. So I do know a little bit about the giant stuff, but I don't have any plans as of yet to actually ever like write.
Yeah, you got so much going on. Yeah, exactly. I wish I had an eighth of the energy that you have to be doing all the stuff you're doing. I'm amazed. So people can find your writings at Inserte Sedis. And what's the significance of that name?
So it's Latin. It means uncertain seat. Literally, that's what it means. We use it in taxonomy. It just means an animal that you're not sure how to classify it. All right. So like, let's say you had a dinosaur, but you didn't understand like which smaller group it went to. Like if it was one of the long neck plant-eating dinosaurs, which would be the sauropods, or like one of the two-legged meat eaters, like the theropods, you didn't know which group it belonged to, then you would say it's Dinosauria inserte sedis. It is of uncertain seat within dinosaurs. You don't know exactly how to classify it. And I felt like that was an appropriate term for what I write about because I write about so much different weird stuff that doesn't really necessarily go together. So I thought it was a fitting name for the blog because I wasn't really sure how to like classify my own writings. Is it cryptozoology? Is it paleontology? Is it history? Is it sociology? Is it whatever, you know? And it's really like all of those things. So I thought that was a good name for the blog.
Yeah, well, it's excellent, and I really enjoy the stuff you're putting out there. And as I said, it's I'll spell it again: INCERTAESEDIS blog.wordpress.com. What's your Twitter?
It should just be Tyler Greenfield.
Okay. I thought that, but I thought the L was like a 1 or something.
The L is a capital I think, because the regular spelling was already taken. But it just looks like Tyler Greenfield. If you search up Tyler Greenfield, it should show up.
Yeah.
So.
All right, yeah, it confused me because I'm like, what is that thing?
It doesn't actually matter.
So you can find Tyler also on Twitter as well. That's where I found him. So thank you so much. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I love a episode where I'm done and I can be like, wow, I actually learned a lot tonight. This is really educational. And as I said at the beginning, very enlightening, and it lived up to that. So thank you so much. This is a lot of fun. And hopefully we can get you back on in the future to talk about, what other stuff you dig up. No pun intended.
Yeah, you're welcome. I had a great time. I'm always keen to talk about my interests with people. I mean, as you can tell, I've talked a lot today. So
it was a lot of fun.